Welcome back. In this video we're going to look at parenthesis, but before we do I want to just repeat the warning that I'm going to have at the start of every technique because it's so important that sentence structure is a dangerous and slippery term. It's merely an umbrella term for all the techniques we should be talking about. And in this video we're going to look at parenthesis, which is one of those techniques, one of the techniques we need to get used to scanning for in text that we should be able to see when we look more closely at a text than we usually do. So, whenever you begin a parenthesis answer, or a sentence structure answer when you choose parenthesis, you'll use this phrase, the writer uses parenthesis. But parenthesis is a tricky concept, so let's look at what it is before we start looking at how to answer a question. And before I start talking about parenthesis, I'm going to talk about trains. This is a train. Now, if I remove a carriage, so say I remove this carriage here and take it away from the train, and I reconnect this end of the train to the front end of the train so that those two carriages meet. I've removed this carriage, but it's still a train. I haven't changed the nature of it by removing that section. And in fact, I could lengthen the train if I wanted to. I could take another carriage. Let me draw an amazing carriage here. There's some wheels, another wheel there. I'm so good at art. I could introduce that extra carriage. I could open up the gap between these two carriages here and I could lengthen the train, and it's still fundamentally a train. Now what you'll find is that sentences work in a very similar way. Take this sentence for an example. The man stole some bread. Right? Very simple. We've got two objects, a subject, a man. The object is the bread. The subject steals the object. The man stole some bread. Now, I can break those up into blocks just like the train carriages. The man is our subject, and then he acted on the object. He stole some bread. And if you can imagine them as train carriages, and I can see, oh right, okay, this is a different way of looking at sentences. We don't know much about this man, do we, that stole some bread? All we've got is the man. We haven't got a whole lot of detail. Now, the writer could use word choice to describe the man in more detail, or one of the other techniques. But a writer may choose to use parenthesis. And this is how it works. What we do is we look at our original carriages, our original blocks of meaning. We decide what we want to say about this man, and we create another carriage. In this case, I've added the idea, the man whose family was starving stole some bread. Now, all of a sudden, we have a better idea of this man and his motives, and we might feel differently about him for stealing the bread. We might forgive him. However, what if I added a different meaning? The man, a well-known thief, stole some bread. Well, then we perhaps have no pity at all, and would perhaps hope that this person was punished for stealing. So, our original sentence can be extended by using parenthesis. Now, if I change the color of my pen here to black, you can imagine if I put some wheels in here, and I know these are rubbish looking wheels, bear with me, but if I put in a few wheels underneath the carriage, come on, I need to make this bigger actually, there's 3 wheels, there, 3 wheels there, there is our extra section added. Now, we don't use train blocks in sentences, but we can use other elements of punctuation, like brackets. Okay, and I'm going to show you the first bracket is here. The second bracket is over here. So it's one way of adding in the extra layers of meaning. So the man whose family was starving stole some bread. The parenthesis is everything in between those brackets. Now, as a writer, we don't have to use brackets. But in this example, the second example we do, the man, a well-known thief, just to show you the two examples. So, whose family was starving, a well-known thief, both add more information and both use brackets. I could have used dashes, however. So the man, a well-known thief, the dashes act in exactly the same way, just to create an imaginary box around a section to show that it's parenthesis. Also, I could use commas. Now, commas are trickier to see because commas could be making a list. Commas could be just there for a pause for whoever's reading the passage to breathe. But they can also be used for parenthesis. And the trickiest one to see is, in fact, the commas. But usually I've found in the past the SQA tend to focus on brackets or dashes rather than commas for parentheses. So this is how we create parentheses. And this is how you recognize parentheses as well. The purple sections are just your normal sentence. The green box is extra information added to give the reader more information, to help them understand your point, to help them understand the text better. So I could use a bracket to add that extra few words. I could use 2 dashes, not 1, note that it's 2 dashes to add parentheses, or I could use commas. So that's the pattern you need to be scanning for and keeping an eye out for. Remember, you're not saying that the brackets make parentheses. You're only concerned with what appears in the green box. You're concerned with the text, so the fact that the man was feeding a starving family or that he was a regular thief. That's the parenthesis. The punctuation just helps you to see it. So let's look at an example of a question to see this in action. I'll read this text out to you before I show you the question. Dogs are famously loyal, but are they more loyal than cats? To answer that question, we must look at how both animals have evolved. Apart from the odd exception, cats hunt alone. On the other hand, dogs are traditionally pack animals, living in a group. It is believed that this is part of the reason that dogs show such strong loyalty. There are many examples of dogs remaining by the side of an injured owner for hours, sometimes days, to humans. Now, the question here is, look at lines 1 to 10, the quote is given, dogs are to humans. Explain how one example of the writer's use of sentence structure makes it clear that dogs are loyal animals, and it's a 2-mark question. So again, you're only ever asked about sentence structure. It's up to you to decide which technique you're going to look at. Are you going to look at a list, parenthesis, repetition, rhetorical question, short sentence? Now, there are other techniques in that paragraph, but for this video, we're focusing on parenthesis, so that's all I'm going to look for. So feel free to pause now and take as long as you like until you see the parenthesis. So when you pause it, scan through until you see either commas making parenthesis, dashes making parenthesis, or brackets making parenthesis. So pause now. Okay, hopefully you've had a go at this, and you might see that the parenthesis appears down the bottom. So in yellow I've marked the dashes, because in this example dashes were used to mark it, but they're only the punctuation. The parenthesis is actually the section in bold and dark black. So there are many examples of dogs remaining by the side of an injured owner for hours, sometimes days. If I removed that sentence altogether, let me grab my pen again. If I removed that sentence, so if I scratched, not the sentence, sorry, but if I removed the parenthesis section of the sentence, the original sentence still makes sense. Watch, I'm going to start reading from here, and I'm going to read down to the bottom of humans. It is believed that this is part of the reason that dogs show such strong loyalty to humans. And that's another test you can use to check if what you're looking at is actually parenthesis. Because if you remove the parenthesis, it will still make grammatical sense. Okay, so in this case, the writer used dashes. We've looked at it there. The writer could have used brackets, works the same way, and could even have used commas. Again, you can see the commas are trickier to spot. All of those are examples of parentheses. So note that the words in the middle in bold didn't change. It's only the punctuation that changed in those 3 examples. So the punctuation is to help us read the parenthesis. The parenthesis is actually the words inside the punctuation. So we have to look for the green block, not the punctuation, not the brackets, not the dashes, not the commas when answering the question. It's okay to look for them to find the parenthesis, but when answering the question, we need to focus on what's in the actual block. So there's the question again. There's the passage again. What does that parenthesis add in relation to the question? So we can start answering it like this. The writer uses parenthesis in lines 8 to 10. That gets us 1 mark straight away because we have correctly identified one of the sentence structure techniques. And all of the rest of my answer is for the 2nd mark. So the writer uses parenthesis in lines 8 to 10 to highlight that there are many accounts of dogs staying beside their owner who has been hurt for a long period of time. And this adds to the writer's case that dogs are loyal. So that was the question. It was about loyalty. I've explained that what the extra information is and how it adds to the writer's case. And that gets me the second mark. So for any parenthesis question, the first thing you have to do is identify that that's the technique you're talking about. Keep an eye out for brackets, commas, or dashes, because that's the punctuation used in parenthesis. That will help you to find the parenthesis. And for the second mark, explain why the writer used the parenthesis. There must be a reason. It's not by accident that writers put parentheses in. They want the readers to learn something more. In our earlier example, we learned more about the man who stole the bread. In the exam, they'll probably be more complicated than that, but the kind of formula, the approach stays exactly the same. So, sentence structure, dangerous and slippy, umbrella term, focus on the techniques. In this case, we looked at parenthesis. Sentence structure is not a technique, so never, please never write the writer uses sentence structure. But you can write the writer uses parenthesis and then go on to explain what lines it's in and the effect of it. Keep an eye out for this structure in texts, so an extra added piece of information, the green blocks, that are highlighted by using punctuation, brackets, dashes, or commas. That's a whistle-stop tour of parenthesis. Hopefully it'll help you now to start identifying and seeing what parenthesis is, and you can now start answering questions on parenthesis. And I'll see you in the next video.